The brunch was a chaos of clinking silver. Suddenly, a shadow slid beside me. My sister's daughter shoved leftovers onto my plate and said, "Mom says you're the family trash." I didn't react. Later that night, Mom texted the group chat, "You're out of our lives." Dad and my sister liked it. I smiled and replied, "Fine. Everything in my name disappears tomorrow." Then I left the group. The silence in my apartment wasn't empty. It was the sound of a bill finally coming due. Before the text, I spent 4 hours invisible among people I financed. Kara bragged about her car's heated seats, ignoring that the lease payment left my account monthly. Mom fussed over Kara, spooning fresh sides onto her plate, while mine held the cold mess my niece had dumped there. I watched gravy congeal against the porcelain, realizing the truth. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was simply the furniture that happened to pay the rent. I drove home in the rain, wipers counting time like a metronome. My apartment was dark, a sharp contrast to their overcrowded dining room. I set my phone on the counter face up. It buzzed, vibrating violently against the stone. The screen lit up with the family circle notification. It was Mom's digital eviction, sent because I hadn't laughed at a child's insult. They expected me to panic and call back begging. They didn't realize that the insults had finally severed the last nerve holding my wallet open. Most daughters would cry. I poured a glass of cold water, my hands steady. The grief I expected was absent, replaced by clinical curiosity. For a decade, I had bought their affection with tuition checks and mortgage help. They called it family duty, I called it survival tax. Now, they were declaring me tax exempt. I typed that single line about disappearing. It felt like cutting a wire on a bomb. The explosion wasn't going to hit me, it was going to hit them. I pressed, "Leave conversation," and their avatars vanished. The silence in the kitchen deepened, feeling clean like a sterilized wound. I didn't wait for frantic texts to start in separate threads. I turned off my cellular data and walked to my desk. My laptop sat closed on the blotter. I opened it, the screen waking up with a soft blue glow. It was time to see exactly what everything in my name meant. I needed the numbers in black and white before I began the erasure. I logged into my primary banking portal. The dashboard loaded, displaying a spiderweb of linked accounts that weren't mine. There was the auto draft for Kara's crossover, the mortgage transfer for the row house, and the family phone plan. Seeing them listed in one column made my stomach turn. I wasn't a person to them, I was a logistics hub. My finger hovered over the trackpad, tracing the long list of dependents. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely. It was the first time the meter wasn't running. The apartment felt pressurized, like a plane cabin losing altitude. I clicked through the banking portal, navigating past the cheerful "Welcome back, Stella" banner. It felt grotesque. I selected the Statements tab and adjusted the date range back 5 years. The download bar crawled across the screen, a slow green worm eating my history. I wasn't just downloading PDFs, I was retrieving the evidence of my own exploitation. The laptop fan whirred to life, signaling the heavy lift ahead. I opened a blank spreadsheet. The white grid looked stark and unforgiving. A digital confession booth. I typed headers with aggressive keystrokes: date, recipient, amount, excuse. I started with the most recent transactions and worked backward. My fingers flew across the number pad, a skill honed by years in finance. But tonight, the muscle memory felt sick. Usually, I balanced corporate ledgers for strangers. Now, I was balancing the books of a family business, where the only product sold was my own guilt. The first pattern emerged under Kara's name. The lease payment for her crossover was the anchor, dragging the bottom line down every month. But it wasn't just the lease. There were tolls from her weekend trips to the shore, gas station charges, and parking tickets she never mentioned. I saw a charge for premium detailing the day before Thanksgiving. She had scrubbed the car I paid for so she could drive it to a dinner where she'd barely speak to me. I moved to the housing costs. The mortgage transfer for my parents' row house appeared with clockwork regularity. Mom always called it our home, but the bank clearly considered it my liability. Mixed in were the erratic, panicked withdrawals. $2,000 for a broken furnace in October. $1,500 for emergency plumbing in March. I cross-referenced the dates with my text messages. Each transfer aligned perfectly with a guilt-laden voicemail about how cold the house was. I had purchased their warmth. The smaller charges were like termites, tiny but structural. The family phone plan with 4 lines. 3 of them using excessive data. Streaming services for music, movies, and sports packages I never watched. I saw a subscription for a meal kit delivery service sent to their address. Mom had complained last week about how hard it was to cook. Yet here was a charge for premium ingredients arriving at her door. They were eating filet mignon, while I ate cold leftovers. Then I found the anomaly. A recurring transfer of $300 labeled High Yield Savings B. I didn't recognize the suffix. I traced the destination account. It was a joint savings account I had access to, but never checked. I opened the transaction history for that sub-account. It was empty. The money flowed in from me and out to Disney resorts and Royal Caribbean. I had unknowingly funded the family vacations they told me they had saved up for all year. I stopped typing. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I highlighted every column, every row. Every year of manufactured crisis and silent theft. I moved the cursor to the sum function. The total didn't just represent money. It represented a down payment on a house, a graduate degree, a life I didn't have. The numbers on the screen were black and white. But they looked like red ink bleeding out of my future. The sun rose over the city, turning my spreadsheet from a midnight confession into a morning battle plan. I drank cold coffee and picked up my phone. It was 9 a.m. sharp. I started with the easy targets first, the ones that didn't require arguments. I logged into the streaming accounts. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify. I changed the passwords first, forcing a logout on every device, then I hit cancel. It was petty, maybe, but necessary. I imagined their screens going black mid-show. Next was the wireless carrier. The automated system tried to upsell me, chirping about family loyalty discounts. I bypassed the robot and reached a human. I need to remove 3 lines, I said, my voice flat. The representative warned me about early termination fees. I told him to bill the card on file one last time. It cost $300 to sever the digital umbilical cord. I authorized the charge without blinking. Silence was expensive. But I was finally willing to pay for it. The car was the heaviest chain. I dialed the leasing agency's premium support line. a perk I paid for but never used. The hold music was smooth jazz, mocking my racing pulse. When an agent named David answered, I explained the situation clearly. I am the primary lessee, but the vehicle is in another state. I need to stop the automatic withdrawal. David hesitated. Ma'am, the contract requires a primary funding source. I told him to send the paper bill to the co-signer's address. David typed loudly in the background. We can switch to manual billing, he said slowly. But if payment is missed, it reflects on your credit score immediately. I gripped the phone tighter. I understand. Please update the mailing address to the lessee. Cara Miller. I recited her address, the one with the driveway where my car sat parked. I wasn't just changing a billing setting. I was handing my sister a grenade. If she wanted the status symbol, she could pay the ransom. I needed armor for the fallout. I called Marcus, a forensic accountant I worked with on complex audits. He picked up on the second ring, sounding surprised. Stella. It's a Tuesday. I skipped the pleasantries. If I stop paying for my parents' mortgage and medical bills today, can they sue me for elderly abandonment? The line went quiet. Marcus didn't laugh or ask if I was joking. He knew how much I made and how little I kept. Legally, no. Marcus said, his voice dropping into professional mode. Unless there is a written contract stating you are their caretaker, those payments are considered gifts. You can stop giving gifts whenever you want. He paused, then added a warning. But document everything, Stella. If they claim you stole funds or breached a verbal contract, you need paper trails. I looked at my spreadsheet. The columns of evidence glowing on the screen. I have 5 years of proof, I said. I hung up, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. Then my email pinged with a confirmation from the leasing agency. I opened it to verify the address change, but my eyes snagged on a red alert at the bottom. Noti account is currently past due. I froze. The auto draft hadn't failed. It had been manually paused by someone with the login. Cara had stopped the payment weeks ago, assuming I'd notice and fix it. With every confirm button I clicked, the invisible tether around my neck loosened by an inch. 2 days passed in a silence, so thick I could almost taste the dust in the air. I sat at my mahogany desk, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick toward noon. It was the first of the month, the universal day of reckoning for automatic drafts and recurring bills. Usually, my phone would buzz with bank alerts, confirming outgoing transfers to electric companies and mortgage lenders. Today, the screen remained black. My coffee went cold as I waited for the inevitable collision between their entitlement and my closed wallet. The first tremor hit at exactly 12:15. My phone vibrated against the hard wood, a harsh buzz that made me jump in my skin. Dad flashed on the screen, accompanied by a photo I took of him at the shore house I paid to rent last summer. He never called during the workday, unless a pipe had burst or a tire had blown out. I let it ring. The vibration traveled up my arm. But I didn't reach for the device. I just watched his smile fade to black. 10 seconds later, the phone lit up again with aggressive persistence. Cara. Pulsed in urgent, bright letters. She didn't leave a voicemail, she just redialed immediately, bypassing the courtesy of a pause. This wasn't a social call. This was a transaction failing in real time. I pictured her standing at a checkout counter. a line of impatient shoppers behind her, her card declining for the first time in her adult life. The image didn't bring me joy, but it brought a grim, cold sense of justice. She was finally feeling the weight. The notifications began to stack like bricks on the lock screen. Missed calls, voicemail icons, and frantic texts demanding my attention began to pile up. I flipped the phone over, face down, silencing the visual noise. I focused on my work monitor, forcing myself to type a routine email to a client. My heart hammered against my ribs, a traitor to my resolve. It is terrifying to stop holding up the sky, even when the people living underneath it barely notice your arms are shaking from the effort. Around 3, a message from Mom broke through the blockade. I expected rage or an apology, but the preview text froze my blood. Honey, the Netflix isn't loading, and the internet seems down. Can you check the account? She had completely ignored the eviction text from 2 nights ago. In her mind, our fight was just a dramatic flare-up, not a permanent change in foreign policy. She assumed I was still the tech support, the banker, and the doormat, regardless of her cruelty. I stared at the message, feeling a cold realization settle deep in my gut. They didn't think I had actually left. To them, my everything disappears text was just a tantrum. A bluff I would fold on as soon as they needed something. They believed my need for their approval was stronger than my self-respect. They weren't calling to reconcile, they were calling the IT department. The sheer arrogance of it hardened the last soft place in my heart into concrete. A final alert pinged on my laptop, bypassing the silenced phone entirely. It was from the mortgage lender. The automatic draft I had canceled had triggered an attempt on the secondary funding source. My parents, joint checking. Transaction failed, insufficient funds. The email detailed the balance attempt. They didn't just lack the full amount. They didn't have enough to cover even the interest. My parents weren't just living paycheck to paycheck. They were living entirely paycheck to my paycheck. 4 days later, I walked into Sal's Corner, seeking a club sandwich and anonymity. I didn't get past the hostess stand. My family occupied the corner booth like a conquering army, displacement written on their faces. Mom waved, a grim gesture that wasn't a greeting but a summons. Dad sat with his arms crossed, staring at the laminate table. Kara was scrolling on her phone, looking bored. They had ambushed me at my sanctuary. There was no escape from this ambush. I slid into the booth, vinyl screeching against my trousers. The air smelled of grease and old arguments. We were worried sick. Mom started, her voice pitched high for the waitress's benefit. You disappeared, Stella. People are talking. She reached for my hand, but I kept mine folded in my lap. We thought you were having a breakdown, Dad added, not looking up. Changing passwords. Bouncing checks. That isn't you. They weren't asking why, they were diagnosing me with insanity. Kara finally looked up, eyes rimmed with red that looked more like anger than fatigue. My car got a repo notice today. She spat, tossing an envelope onto the table. It slid through a puddle of condensation. Mia has dance class tonight. How am I supposed to get her there? Walk. She didn't ask about my life or my silence. She only cared about the logistics of her own convenience. To her, I was just a broken vending machine. I didn't apologize. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a heavy manila folder. It hit the table with a dull thud, shaking the silverware. I opened it, revealing the spreadsheet I had agonized over. The font was small, but the totals were bold and impossible to ignore. "This isn't a breakdown," I said, my voice steady. "This is a receipt." I pointed to the bottom line, a six-figure sum that could have bought a small house. Mom squinted at the paper, her face paling as she recognized the dates. Mortgage, utilities, car lease, vacations. I listed, tapping each category. "I have paid for every bite of food you ate, and every mile you drove for 5 years." The diner noise faded into a buzzing background hum. "You called me trash," I said to Kara, who was glaring at the paper like it was a lie. "This proves I am not trash. I am the only reason you aren't homeless." Kara opened her mouth to scream, but a small voice cut through the tension. Mia, my niece, looked up from her coloring placemat. She was wearing the expensive sneakers I had bought for her birthday. "Why is Aunt Stella making Grandma cry?" she asked, her voice innocent and loud. She looked at her mother, confused. "You said we didn't have to worry about money, because Stella pays for it. You said that's her job." The table went dead silent. The truth hung over the table, ugly and undeniable. Kara went pale, caught in her own lie by her own child. I stood up, gathering my purse, but leaving the folder open on the table. "My job is done," I said. "You can pick up the check for lunch. I am sure you can afford a sandwich." I walked away, my heels clicking on the tile. Behind me, the waitress arrived. The truth didn't set them free, it just made them look expensive. Walking away from the diner felt like stepping off a ledge and finding solid ground mid-air. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump of finally saying, no. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I drove to a mobile carrier store 3 towns over, paranoia guiding my steering wheel. I bought a prepaid SIM card with cash, handing over the bills with a strange sense of finality. This wasn't just a new number, it was a new identity. I was no longer the daughter they could summon, I was a ghost. Back in my apartment, I performed digital surgery on my life. I swapped the SIM cards and initiated the porting process, effectively killing the line they had memorized. Then, I logged into social media on my laptop. One by one, I blocked them. Mom, Dad, Kara, even my cousins who acted as flying monkeys. The prompt asked, "Are you sure you want to block this user?" 10 times. I clicked, yes, without hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was fortified. I wasn't burning a bridge, I was dismantling a trap. The peace lasted exactly 48 hours before the external noise breached my walls. A college friend sent me a screenshot. Her message tentative and awkward. "Hey, I saw this and thought you should know." It was a Facebook post from Mom, shared by Kara. The text was a masterpiece of victimhood, claiming I had abandoned my elderly parents in a time of medical crisis and stolen family funds. The comments were filled with sympathy from people who didn't know I paid the internet bill that allowed them to post those lies. My first instinct was to scream, to type a furious paragraph defending my character against their fiction. But anger is messy, and I needed to be precise. I opened my spreadsheet, the same one I had slapped onto the diner table. I took a screenshot of the 5-year total, redacting the account numbers but leaving the recipient names and amounts clearly visible. I posted it with a single caption. Receipts for the stolen funds. I hope this clears up the confusion. Then I turned off comments and closed the laptop. The social media war was petty, but the house was the nuclear option. I met with a real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Alina, who smelled like expensive tea and litigation. I explained that I wanted my name off the deed to the row house immediately. If you quitclaim your interest, she warned, adjusting her glasses, it might trigger the due on sale clause for the mortgage if they can't refinance. I looked at her, thinking of the family trash comment. That sounds like a problem for the homeowners. I replied cold. Signing the quitclaim deed felt heavier than writing a check. The notary stamp hit the paper with a sound like a gavel strike. By removing my name, I wasn't just abdicating ownership. I was removing the credit score that kept their interest rate manageable. The bank would notify them within the week that the terms of their loan had changed. They would need to requalify on their own merits, a test I knew they would fail. I was handing them the deed to a house of cards. The retaliation came faster than the bank notice. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an urgent alert from my credit monitoring service. New inquiry, Saks Fifth Avenue. Someone was trying to open a store credit card in my name, at a mall 20 minutes from my parents' house. Kara. She must have memorized my social security number years ago, when I signed her student loans. She wasn't just mad, she was desperate, trying to reclaim the lifestyle I had stolen back. I pressed the "This wasn't me" button on the app, my finger trembling with rage. The system immediately flagged the application as fraudulent. The beauty of the credit freeze I had placed days ago was that it didn't just stop the application. It alerted the vendor. The sales clerk at Saks would be looking at a fraud alert screen right now, asking Kara for identification she couldn't provide. I imagined the humiliation burning her cheeks, the security guard stepping closer. She had tried to steal my name, but she only found a locked door. I didn't call the police, though I could have. Instead, I had Elena draft a formal cease and desist letter. It outlined the financial harassment, the identity theft attempt, and the defamation. It stated clearly that any further contact would be met with a restraining order and criminal charges for fraud. We sent it via certified mail, requiring a signature. They would have to sign for their own indictment. It was the last autograph they would ever get from me. The legal wall was now as high as the emotional one. The return receipt for the letter arrived 3 days later, signed in Dad's shaky handwriting. I taped it to my refrigerator, a grim trophy of my independence. The silence that filled my apartment now wasn't the tentative quiet of waiting for the next crisis. It was the deep, resonant stillness of safety. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, realizing that for the first time in my life, nobody was reaching into my pocket. I wasn't hiding from the world, I was finally living in it. 3 months passed like a deep exhale. The silence on my phone was no longer ominous, it was just life. I focused on my job, earning a promotion that would have usually bought my parents a new appliance. Now, it just padded my savings. The first crack in their facade reached me through Mrs. Gable, a neighbor who loved gossip more than oxygen. She caught me at the grocery store, leaning over her cart with gleeful eyes. "Did you hear about the crossover?" she whispered. "Gone in the night. Mrs. Gable described the scene with cinematic precision. A flatbed tow truck had arrived at dawn, the flashing orange lights waking up the block. Kara had run out in her pajamas, screaming at the driver, waving her phone like a weapon. But the driver had a repossession order, not a customer service line. He hooked the bumper and dragged the status symbol away. Kara was left standing on the asphalt, barefoot and carless. The neighborhood finally saw the bankruptcy behind the arrogance. The car was just the first domino. The quitclaim deed I signed had triggered the mortgage review I predicted. Without my income history anchoring the loan, the bank deemed my parents high risk. They couldn't refinance. Mrs. Gable sent me a photo a week later. For sale. Sign planted in the lawn of the row house. It wasn't a choice, it was a liquidation. The home Mom claimed was our legacy was being sold to cover the debts of her pride. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the highway, a significant downgrade from the historic row house. I drove past it once, just to see the reality. The building was beige and boxy, devoid of the charm Mom built her identity around. There was no room for the antique dining table or the piano nobody played. They were forced to shed the props of their performance. They were finally living the life they could afford, and it looked small, gray, and honest. Then came the inevitable escalation. My emergency burner phone, known only to Marcus, lit up late one Tuesday. It was a number from the local ER. My stomach dropped, instinct momentarily overriding logic. I answered, expecting a doctor. Instead, it was Kara, breathless and frantic. Mom collapsed. She sobbed, the background noise chaotic. They need a credit card for admission. You have to come down here. She's asking for you. It was a precise strike at the daughter I used to be. I almost grabbed my keys. But the credit card for admission line snagged in my brain. Hospitals don't deny emergency care based on payment. That's illegal. I told Kara I was 5 minutes away and hung up. Then I called the hospital's main switchboard. I asked for the nursing station. The charge nurse was brisk but clear. Mrs. Miller is here for anxiety and dehydration, she said. She is stable and being discharged soon. There was no collapse. It was a trap. The rage I felt was cold and sharp. I didn't call Kara back. I texted the burner number she had used. Nurse confirmed it's anxiety. She is being discharged. Do not call this number again. I pulled the battery out of the phone and set it on the counter. They weren't in danger. They were just in withdrawal from my support. Using a medical scare to pick my pocket was a new low, even for them. It killed the last lingering guilt. A week later, a letter arrived at my office, marked personal. The handwriting was Dad's, shaky and pressed hard into the paper. There was no return address. I opened it carefully, half expecting a bill. Instead, it was a single page of lined notebook paper. He didn't ask for money explicitly. He wrote about how hard the move was, how small the new apartment felt, and how much Mom cried. He said he missed our Sunday dinners. He missed the comfort I provided. I read the letter twice, looking for the apology. He said he was sorry. Things got this bad. He was sorry. We had a misunderstanding. He wasn't sorry for using me. He was sorry the utility was gone. He missed the buffer I placed between him and the world, not his daughter. If I went back now, I would just be a wallet with legs again. I shredded the letter. The paper ribbons fell into the bin, mixing with the rest of the trash. I didn't reply. Responding would only teach them that pity was a valid currency. And I had stopped accepting counterfeit bills. I sat in my paid-for apartment, listening to the hum of the city. They were surviving. They had a roof, food, and each other. Everything they claimed was enough when they were taking my money. Now they had to prove it. I watched their world shrink back to the size of their actual wallets, and I felt no guilt, only gravity. It had been exactly 1 year since the diner. My apartment finally looked like a home, instead of a storage unit for other people's emergencies. The beige walls were now a deep sage green, a color I chose simply because I liked it. I sat on my velvet sofa, drinking tea that cost more than $1 a bag. Sunlight hit the floorboards, illuminating dust motes dancing in the quiet air. There was no dread in my chest today. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was just spacious. I opened my banking app, a ritual that used to induce nausea. Now, the numbers were a source of calm. The emergency fund was full, and the house fund was growing. But the best part was the Stella fund. I scrolled through the transactions. No bailouts, no unexpected medical bills for phantom illnesses. No lease payments for cars I didn't drive. Every dollar spent was a choice I made for myself. The bleeding had stopped. And the wound had finally scarred over, tough and pale. I clicked over to a travel website. For years, I had funded trips to Disney and Caribbean cruises, paying for tickets I never held. Today, I was looking at a solo villa in Tuscany. I selected dates in October, when Mom usually demanded help with winterizing the house. I entered my credit card information. The same card Kara had tried to max out. The confirmation screen popped up. You are going to Italy. It was the first vacation I was actually going to enjoy. My niece's voice still echoed occasionally, calling me family trash. It used to sting, but distance had changed the acoustics. I realized they hadn't thrown me away because I was worthless. They discarded me because they thought I was a renewable resource they could treat like garbage. But trash is what you toss when it has no value. I was the foundation. I was the walls and the roof. When they tried to demolish me, they were the ones who ended up exposed to the elements. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking my reverie. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. Blocked message attempted 1. It didn't say who it was from, but I knew. It was a birthday, or an anniversary. Or just a Tuesday where the rent was due. My thumb hovered over the notification. Curiosity would have made me look before. I would have read the guilt trip, the plea, or the anger. I would have let them back in. I didn't open it. I swiped the banner to the left, dismissing it into the digital void. The screen cleared, returning to the photo of the Tuscan countryside I used as wallpaper. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. My counter was clean, my sink was empty, and my fridge was full of food I actually liked. My plate was finally empty of their leftovers, and for the first time in 37 years, I was hungry for my own life.